Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my quarterback, tight end, and defensive rankings for Week 12. We're going to start at quarterback, where 6 teams are on bye. The most important quarterbacks missing would be Josh Allen and Joe Burrow, along with Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, and Trevor Lawrence and Mac Jones, technically. But also, Brock Purdy has been ruled out. Brandon Allen will get the start for the Niners. But we're also going to be missing Dak Prescott, who's on IR, and Daniel Jones, who just got released by the Giants. So Tommy DeVito will start in his absence. Before I get going, I do want to mention the impact of those buys. In terms of matchups, there's actually a lot of good matchups missing. 4 in the top 10 are not available due to bye. The Bengals and Jets rank top 3. Meanwhile, the Falcons and Jags rank top 6. So that's a big bummer. If you do have one of the elite matchups, maybe you should be starting that quarterback, because compared to the rest of the pack, it is by far a better spot to be in. But that number one matchup is shockingly going to Tommy DeVito, of all people. Maybe the Italian Tommy Cutlets is the right start this week off the wire. But that next best matchup, a significant drop off until matchup number 7, would be Dallas, and that goes to Jayden Daniels. So he's struggled lately as well. I think he could have a very good game off some rest in a bounce back spot versus the Cowboys. But that third best matchup this week, 20.6 points per game, goes to Justin Herbert. It is the Ravens, and that's been a bad secondary all year. So let's get into it. Keep that in mind. There's a lot more average matchups or bad matchups available this week. At number 1, I think it's pretty obvious, though. Jalen Hurts has been by far the QB1 over the last 4 weeks. And the big stat to pay attention to with him is 7 rushing touchdowns in that span. He is on pace for potentially 20 this season. Hurts should be better than last year with 15. So he's the quarterback 1, definitely a stud. The matchup does rank bottom 10, but on Sunday night, Jalen Hurts will be great. I trust him with my life. Definitely the QB1 this week. At number 2, I have Lamar Jackson at the Chargers, who maybe isn't the back-to-back MVP, not quite as good the last few games, but still a stud in fantasy. He should bounce back in a big way. Maybe the Jim Harbaugh rivalry does force the defense to step up, but I doubt it. I think this is much more of a shootout than a low-scoring game. And that's why number 3, I think, is a must-start, would be Justin Herbert in the same game on Monday night. I am going to this game. Maybe I am biased because I am a Charger fan. I'm rooting for my team to win, and I think they will. I think Herbert will dominate, though, because the matchup is one of the best. This week, it does rank top 7, and overall, that is top 3 on the board. So Ravens have been bad all year, giving up 20.6 points per game the last 5 weeks, 312 passing yards per game, with 11 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and 13 rushing yards per game. So Herbert should be dominant in the pass department. On the ground, he's also been very good, very much a factor of his game. In his last 4, averaging 37 rushing yards per game with 1 rushing touchdown. He is quarterback 5 in points per game with 21.9 on average. 256 passing yards, 7 touchdowns, only 1 turnover as well. So Herbert's very safe. I think he's a very good play this week. I think Ladd McConkey's going to play well, and Quentin Johnston, Will Dissly will probably step up as well. I do trust Herbert in a likely shootout against Lamar. Number 4 is Bo Nix, who's the quarterback 4 in scoring the last 4 games. Nix is really good in fantasy and in real life. He's a very legit quarterback, potentially the rookie of the year on offense if Daniels continues to slump. Nix in his last 4 games is a stud in fantasy, though. 23.8 points per game is fantastic. 257 passing yards, on par with Justin Herbert. 9 touchdowns, 1 turnover, 10 rushing yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. He has more touchdowns than Herbert, and very few turnovers as well. Nix is very good this season. Sean Payton is really developing him nicely. So love his floor. I think the ceiling is there. The matchup is also top 9 versus Las Vegas. It's one of the best you can find this week. So I absolutely trust him. He played well against them the first time around. They snapped an 8-game losing streak. That game was in Denver. This one will be in Vegas, and maybe the Raiders get back to winning, but I doubt it. I don't trust the Raiders personally. So they've been a top 10 matchup lately. I do trust Nix a lot. I think he'll be great. And on the season, he averages close to 30 rushing yards. He's been slightly underperforming lately, but he can offer 50 plus any given week. I Love that about his floor. Nix is pretty safe. I think he's a top 10 play rest of season, but he does have a bye in week 14. At number 5, I am trusting the matchup with Jayden Daniels. He has been bad the last 4 games. Daniels is the quarterback 18 in scoring, averaging only 15.5 points per game. But it's because of that rib injury. I think as he distances himself from it on the calendar, he will get back to running it a bit more. I don't know if he'll totally dominate. He was way better the beginning of the season. Since the rib injury, only 28 rushing yards per game, no rushing touchdowns is the reason why he's been so bad. But only 1 turnover, similar to Herbert, Lamar, and Bo Nix. Usually keeps it clean, and I think against Dallas, you definitely want to chase this matchup. It's a top 2 spot this week. Number 4, the last 5 games, Dallas gives up 22 points per game, 256 yards, 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, along with 26 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. If Jayden can get back to his mobile skill set, I think he'll be great in fantasy. This week, even in the passing game, though, I think the floor is very high. I would be starting Daniels this week against Dallas. Number 6, I'm also starting Baker Mayfield at the Giants, and I'm trusting this matchup. It ranks top 14 the last 4 games. The Giants have not caught a single interception, but only allowed 187 passing yards per game, 5 touchdowns. However, 30 on the ground and 3 rushing touchdowns. If you told me Baker gets Mike Evans back and he might have 30 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown this week against the Giants, he might be one of the best league winners on the week. So I am definitely starting him. I think it's a big upgrade. He doesn't have Chris Godwin. That's not great. But with Cade Otton and Rachaad White really stepping up in the pass department, if Evans is back, I'm absolutely starting Baker once again. He's treaded water, still the quarterback 13 in points the last 4 games, and most of those are without Evans or Godwin. So he'll be back in the top 10 for sure. I'm definitely starting Baker. He was a top 3 quarterback before Evans and Godwin went out. Number 7, I'm starting Jared Goff this week at the Colts. I don't know if he's as good as last week, because even with 40 plus points, at least in my league scoring last week, he's still averaging 16.9 points per game, and that's not too good. So that's ranking as quarterback 14. It's on par with Baker, but a bit of a tier below, and it's pretty emblematic of his risk. But obviously the 5 turnovers all happen in the same game, and in general, he'll probably average out closer to this 17-point average. But many games this year, he gives you less than 16 points. It's like you either get 15 most of the time, and then there's a handful with like 30 points, and then there's a handful with less than 10. Most of those 10-pointers have come lately. So Goff is not the best option in general, but he has a ceiling unknown to most other quarterbacks. And later in these rankings, I don't think you can find a player with the same ceiling as Goff. So last week was so good, you kind of have to start him. The Colts matchup is very average, no downgrades at all, and it could turn into a shootout. The Lions probably score another 40 points, but maybe 30 of them come on the ground. At number 8, I'm starting Kyler Murray this week at Seattle, and I wanted to rank him higher. I would have had him top 5 if not for the weather. This game is going to have a lot of rain in Seattle, and off the bye, it might be more of a run-based attack and more reliant on defense in division. So I don't think Kyler's the best play. He's only averaging 218 passing yards per game, though, and he is still the quarterback 10 in scoring with 19 points per game. So he doesn't need to throw it that much in the first place to be productive. However, rushing touchdowns are kind of critical for him. He has 3 of them in that stretch, 7 touchdowns total with 2 turnovers. So not like insane touchdown numbers, especially in the passing game. That's not really what he offers. So that's why Trey McBride is so touchdown lacking this season, but maybe against Seattle, he needs to step up. It could turn into a shootout. I think with the rain, it's probably more of a low score. So I think that caps his ceiling, but Seattle's not a bad matchup. It is technically above average. And this week, that is all you can ask for. So I would start Kyler at QB 8. He's a safe play. I thought he'd be top 5. With the rain, I bumped him down to 8. Number 9, I have Patrick Mahomes at Carolina. And now I think we're kind of in the streaming conversation. I don't think it's actually the safest start. Mahomes has not been as elite as previously this season. So Mahomes is not always the best bet, but he is the quarterback 11 in scoring the last 4 games, averaging 18.8 points per game. And that's actually exactly what the Panthers give up on average. So that's probably what you should expect. 18.8 points from Mahomes in a typical 4-point touchdown scoring format. So he's a fine play. I think you should be starting him. There's a chance that after the loss, they go ham on offense. If Kelce gets back to scoring, Worthy steps up, Hopkins plays well, and Noah Gray scores another 2 touchdowns, then maybe Mahomes is the QB1 this week. I do want to factor that in to the equation. So I would start him as a top 10 play. I do trust him. The floor feels good, but his ceiling has not been insane this year. Pacheco's not going to play, so the run matchup is not as exploitable. With Kareem Hunt, I think Mahomes probably needs to do more of the damage. So definitely trust him at number 9. I think he's a safe bet. The matchup's top 11, and he is also QB 11. I think he'll probably finish top 11 this week. And number 10, I have Tua Tagovailoa versus the Patriots, and I think he goes off this week. I think Tua has a very good game. He normally plays a lot better at home in this matchup than on the road, and this game is in Miami, where we always see the Dolphins win. Historically, it's very rare the Patriots do win. So I do trust him. I think Tyreek has a very good game. He usually goes over 100 yards at home. And Jonnu Smith is really stepping up. We know A-Chain catches passes. And if Waddle can do something for once, then that ceiling will be open. So I view Tua as a top 10 play. I like the matchup quite a bit. The Patriots have only given up 1 interception along with 9 touchdowns the last 5 games. But in the passing game, only 216 yards per game. That's where maybe the ceiling is capped. But Tua could throw for 300. I wouldn't be shocked. Against a division opponent, they might never ease up on the scoreboard. So Tua should play well. I trust the floor a lot. He's the quarterback 16 in scoring the last 4 games, averaging 16.5 with only 1 turnover and 7 touchdowns. He is throwing more touchdowns as of late. At home, I trust him. Weather's not a factor this week. At number 11, I think Stafford is probably still a decent start. In a 12-team league, I would put him in my lineup at QB 11. But I am really worried about this matchup. It's the worst you can ask for. The Eagles have been elite on defense lately since the bye. The last 5 games in particular here, 9.2 points per game allowed, 153 yards per game, 2 touchdowns, 5 picks, 19 rushing yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. We know Stafford does nothing on the ground. He literally averages -1 rushing yard in his last 4 games. So it's all going to have to come in the passing game. And with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, you think the floor is always going to be high. Stafford should be okay. But I am really worried about the Eagles matchup. They have extra rest, extra time to game plan. And on Sunday night, it's possible the Rams fall flat. So the season's a bit on the line, however. They've lost too many games to start the year, and I do think they're in desperation mode. Stafford, I think, steps it up enough to pay off. He has been the quarterback 8 the last 4 games with Puka back on the field. So with 10 touchdowns, 3 turnovers, 291 yards per game, he's averaging 20 plus points per game. And that's why I still think you're starting him. The upside is too high. Odds are it's a shootout. I would definitely project a score closer to like 35-33 this week than like 30-16. You know, the Rams will hold their own against the Eagles. They probably lose, but still play well enough to compete. So Stafford at QB 11, I would still probably start him, but I am very worried about the matchup. Getting pretty dark now, so let's go double time. Jordan Love, I think, is probably on the cusp. The matchup against the Niners is bottom 5, and they have caught 7 picks the last 5 games. He's thrown 5 turnovers himself, so I do worry about the turnovers. He hasn't, truly cracked open the ceiling this season. A bit of a letdown, but this is roughly where we drafted him at quarterback 12-ish, and I think this week that's kind of what he offers. They might not need to compete that much against the backup quarterback and the Niners. So at number 12, I'd probably start him in a deeper format, but top 10, I don't think so. Number 13, I think Stroud still needs to prove something. He's a terrible quarterback in fantasy last month, but with Nico back, if he had that 77-yard touchdown last week, the numbers would look way, way better. So the matchup's top 8. The Titans don't scare you that much. I think at number 13, Stroud is a decent streaming option. I think at some point he does get back to the production we anticipated now that Nico is healthy. But who knows? In division, it could be a low score. He has been terrible in fantasy, averaging 11.2 points the last 4 games. At some point, though, he should bounce back. The matchup's good enough to trust. At number 14, I think Tommy DeVito is a streamer this week. Definitely a good option to pivot to if you're desperate on the wire. The matchup's the best by far. The Bucks allow 24.8 points per game. I showed you that graph at the beginning of the video. The next best matchup this week is like 22 points, and then after that, it's barely 20. So if you get 5 extra points just by default against Tampa Bay, I think Tommy DeVito will be a safe floor play for at least 16. If you look back to last year, he was averaging 30 rushing yards per game, only 1 turnover his last 4, an average of 15.2, but less than 200 yards passing. And Malik Neighbors is actually not a guarantee to play this week, so maybe the upside is capped, but Slayton should be okay. If DeVito runs it well, the Bucks probably give up at least 16 points to him in fantasy. So I think number 14, if you're on the waiver wire looking for an option, Tommy DeVito, I think is one of my favorite options past, I mean, at this point, I don't think you can get Bo Nix anymore or Herbert. Yeah, DeVito, I think is my favorite pickup off the wire this week. Number 15, I have Drake Maye, who I also really like. I think long-term, I'd rather have Drake Maye than DeVito. But this week, I think DeVito's matchup is better. Drake Maye has an average matchup, and he also runs for 48 rushing yards per game. So that's really critical why his floor is so high. But he throws for less than 175 per game. So his floor has been 14 points the last 4 games, and sometimes he could burn you. In division, I do kind of worry about it. On the road, the Dolphins have stepped up their defense lately. So not my favorite play, but if you need to, go ahead and pick him up. As a backup, I think he is a safe depth piece rest of year. I think he will be roughly ranked around 15 most weeks. At 16, I have Geno Smith versus Arizona, and with the rain, I'm definitely concerned about his upside. I think he's more of a floor play, probably close to 14 points as well. But the Cardinals are a bottom 10 matchup. I could see a very low ceiling this week, but Geno does throw the most passing yards of any quarterback this season. So that keeps the floor high. I think he probably hasn't turned over that much, and I actually do think the Seahawks win. So at 16, not the worst bet, but I'd rather go DeVito off the wire. Richardson comes in at 17, and the matchup's actually bottom 3. The Lions only allow 11.7 points per game to opposing quarterbacks. So really tough spot here. Only 3 touchdowns to 7 interceptions, and you need Richardson to contribute on the ground if he's going to offer that upside. But you know he could break the game open. He not only offers like elite run appeal, he can also hit a touchdown from 60 yards out. So that cannon always keeps his upside high. I don't think this is the matchup to chase, though. I think rest of season he has a lot of upside, but against Detroit, everyone deserves a downgrade. So at 17, I think I'd rather bench him in a 2-quarterback league, though. You are starting Richardson this week. At number 18, I will admit, this is one of the ranks I think I could be really wrong about. Richardson and DeVito, I think, could actually be top 5 this week, potentially. I want to open the door for that possibility with them. So this, I think, is the cutoff point. Richardson is kind of the last guy I'd like to stream, and he's kind of in the same tier as everyone from him all the way up to Mahomes at number 9. Sam Darnold is at number 18, who I think I'd rather bench this week. I don't trust the turnovers with him. He has 7 in his last 4 games, and with 7 touchdowns, passing 1 rushing touchdown, it's not that great. He has great weapons, but against the Bears in Chicago, definitely not the best matchup you can chase. So not expecting multiple touchdowns for him. I think the ceiling's definitely capped, and if he throws like 3 interceptions again, I wouldn't be shocked. So Darnold at 18 he's the quarterback 15 the last 4 games, but I think this matchup does scare me enough to not start him this week. I did rank Jameis Winston and Russell Wilson as benches on Thursday. I told you they were quarterbacks 20 and 21, but I am taking Purdy out of the rankings, so they do move up 1 spot because of that. So I was a little too low on Jameis. He played very well. The matchup was bottom 2, however, and now I do trust him. He is a top 12 quarterback the last 4 games. So Winston looking really good, very pass-heavy offense. I do like his upside rest of season. At 20, I did tell you to bench Russ, who looked decent in the snow. He had a few deep touchdowns, but not really the best option. The matchup was top 10, but the weather, I think, was the right logic to avoid. At 21, I think I'm also avoiding Caleb Williams versus the Vikings, and Brian Flores could definitely shut him down. A rookie in that spot probably doesn't play too well. But what's most shocking for his numbers is how like risk averse he is. Only one turnover the last 4 games, but not a single touchdown. 0 passing touchdowns, 0 rushing touchdowns. So the ceiling is extremely capped. You get nothing from Caleb. But maybe the new OC does start to change things. Inevitably, there should be some gradual progress for Caleb in the red zone. But Jesus, not a single touchdown? That's insane. Caleb really not paying off this season. At 22 is where I rank Brandon Allen of the Niners on the road at Green Bay. He will get the start. Purdy is out with injury. So that's really going to deplete this offense. I think there's not much upside. The season might be over if they lose this game. I would be worried for the Niners. So not going to start Allen. Definitely not trusting him. But in Kyle Shanahan's system, maybe there's enough yak to cover your ass in fantasy. I'd rather avoid it though. I'll pass on the backup. Will Levis at 23 at Houston, probably going to throw many turnovers, but he has been clean since returning from injury. He is averaging 17.4 points the last 2 weeks, but he had 40 rushing yards against the Chargers. It came back down to 20 last week. You need some rushing yards from Levis. I doubt it happens enough to save you against the Texans. They've caught 9 interceptions the last 5 games. At 24, I'm also benching Bryce Young against the Chiefs, the toughest defense in the NFL. No thanks at all. 25, Cooper Rush did throw for over 300 yards last week, but no touchdowns. Not much of an upside option at all. Definitely benching Cooper at the Commanders. Lastly, Gardner Minshew threw for 3 interceptions last time he played the Broncos. I'm definitely benching Minshew this week. Let's move on to tight end, where we are also missing several options due to bye. Kyle Pitts, Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, Taysom Hill, Juwan Johnson, Evan Ingram, Mike Gesicki, and Tyler Conklin are all unranked because of bye. But Jake Ferguson is out. He has a concussion. He will not play this week, and you can't start him or any of the other guys here on the screen. But let's get going. My top tight end this week would be Brock Bowers versus Denver, who was even more insane after the bye. You know he's elite. Definitely a lock in your lineup every single week. And with the backup quarterback for Kittle, I think this week he does supplant him, the number 1 tight end in week 12, in my opinion. At number 2, I think Trey McBride is also a very good start. The rain might be a factor, but Seattle has given up 3 touchdowns to tight ends the last 5 games, and maybe he does get in the end zone once again. He rarely catches touchdowns. That's the only problem for McBride, but the volume has been great for him. 6.8 targets, 5.3 catches, 71 yards. He does it near the line of scrimmage, down the field. He does everything but score touchdowns reliably. So definitely trust the floor. No one is benching Trey McBride. At 3, I think Cade Otton takes a slight dip in value with Mike Evans expected to return, but not enough to bench. He's still an elite option, definitely a high floor for him. 9.8 targets per game for him the last 4 games, and I do think it still hovers above 8. I don't think he's going anywhere. He's still taking on the role that Chris Godwin vacated after his ankle got blown up. So Otton is still safe. I definitely trust him. I think Baker plays well, but the Giants are actually the worst matchup for tight ends, only giving up 27 yards to the position on average. So maybe you'd like to read into that, but personally, I think that's just a product of who they've faced, not expecting Otton to be a complete bust against the Giants. Number 4, I have Dallas Goedert at the Rams, and last year Goedert was elite. He went over 110 yards against LA in this matchup with a touchdown as well. So I think he pays off once again. The Rams have not given up a single rushing touchdown in the last 5 games to neither quarterbacks nor running backs. So I think they need to look elsewhere in the red zone. Hurts and Barkley still probably score a touchdown, but I think they'll look for Goedert a lot this game. I think on Sunday night, Goedert will be a great play. If you look at his last 4 full games, he is the tight end 6, averaging 12.5 points per game. One of those games, though, both Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown did not play, at least at some point in that Saints matchup. That was the 170-yard game for Goedert. So he's been injured. That this sample size goes back quite a while, and it is a bit misleading because of that. But Goedert, I think, will have a great game. He could have his second best game of the year. Number 5 is where I go George Kittle, and with the backup quarterback, I am concerned off the hamstring injury. He will play. He was full in practice, but I just don't think this offense will be the same without Brock Purdy. So not expecting like an elite volume for him, and without Purdy, maybe the touchdown doesn't hit. I'm still starting him. I'm not going to bench him. He's the tight end 1 this season, but it's just not the same thing without Purdy. So the Packers matchup do give up 61 yards per game. I do think Kittle's floor is fine, but in general, he rarely gets more than 6 targets. So maybe Allen does cap his ceiling quite a bit. Number 6, I have David Njoku, who technically I did rank at number 5 yesterday. I did tell you to start him, but then I looked into Goedert's stats and I did rank Goedert above Kittle this week. So he does move down, but I did tell you to start Njoku. The thought process, I think, was right. With all the teams on bye, I think at worst you would have ranked him like number 8. And I think most people were starting Njoku no matter what. But he did let you down. He dropped a touchdown, did catch a 2-point conversion, but only had like 3.5 points. He was bad on Thursday. The snow did not benefit him at all. And Cedric Tillman also went out with a concussion. I was shocked about this because his last games against Pittsburgh, he was going over 60 yards per game. This was a shocker. So big dud from Njoku, bad game from him. I missed on this rank. At 7, I have Travis Kelce at Carolina. Last week, he really did not pay off. Noah Gray had 2 touchdowns. I'm sure you were livid to see that happen. But he does get a top 4 matchup, so it should bounce back. They have given up 5 touchdowns to tight ends the last 5 games. But if they go to Noah Gray, you will be fucked. And that's why Kelce is not the safe option I thought he was. He has not been the same this season, but he still has 11 targets per game the last month, and I still trust the floor. I think if you have Kelce, you got to start him. There's 6 teams on bye. I doubt you have multiple tight ends ranked higher. But at number 8, I think ride the wave with Jonnu Smith. He's been the tight end 9 the last 4 games. And the last 6 weeks, he does have like 45 yards in almost every single game. Like Jonnu has been very reliable in fantasy as of late. I think he's taken on the role for Jalen Waddle in this offense. So kind of a shocker. They pay Waddle a lot, but Jonnu's the guy. And last week he had 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was fantastic. So I trust him. I think it's a great game for Tua this week. I think he's going to play very well. Patriots, not a scary matchup at all. Jonnu, a safe floor play, but I do think it's a teardrop from Kelce. I think at this point you're just streaming the position, and you can point to anyone at this ranking. But I'm going to go Jonnu Smith. I am starting him in the subscriber league. I did pick him up off the wire, and I spent $13 of my fab. I really wanted to covet Jonnu. He might be one of the last difference makers available off the wire. Probably not anymore. Number 9, I got Sam LaPorta at the Colts, and this is a good matchup. The Colts rank top 6. They've given up 3 touchdowns to the position along with 69 yards per game. So LaPorta's healthy. He will play, and he is tied for tight end 12 with Mark Andrews, who I rank right behind him. I think LaPorta is a start. Obviously, he's burned you a few times this year. You could get disappointed again, but when he does score a touchdown, he usually goes off, and that has been happening at a higher rate more lately. So I think at number 9, I would start LaPorta. Some people have asked me, should I drop LaPorta? And I would not do that at all. I think tight end's just a rough position. I know he's been a disappointment, but there are very few options off the wire that you could feel better about. But Jonnu, I would rather go with over LaPorta. That's the only one this week. Number 10, I got Mark Andrews at the Chargers, and he's tied with LaPorta in terms of production, 8.7 points per game for both of them. But the volume is not that high for either player, 4.3 targets for both guys. So you just need the touchdown to hit against the Chargers. It's actually a terrible matchup. They've given up no touchdowns to tight ends the last 5 games, and maybe it's the second week in a row where he burns you. But I think that game without Isaiah Likely was the outlier. He played very well, had like 94% of snaps. He was back in a committee last week. So just not the safest bet. Without a touchdown, Andrews can still really disappoint in fantasy. But at number 10, I'd probably still start him. Hard to find a better upside play moving forward. At number 11, though, I think the safest floor play would be Hunter Henry, my favorite streamer this week other than Jonnu Smith. And he's been pretty safe. No touchdowns the last 4 games, but an average of 57 yards on 5.5 catches. That's 8.5 points in fantasy. So very safe floor play. And if he does find the end zone, you're going to be ecstatic. Hunter Henry is the top weapon for Drake Maye in this Patriots offense. So trust him the most. The matchup's top 7. They give up 69 yards per game, along with 2 touchdowns. Maybe Hunter Henry does go over double digits this week. At 11, I would probably start him off the wire. Number 12, I think Will Dissly is also worth a start off the wire. A decent streaming option. He has averaged 7.5 points per game the last 4. That does include a touchdown, though, only 40 yards per game. So in general, you're expecting about 6 points from Dissly, but he is bust-proof, and against the Ravens, it could be a shootout. I think like last week, he could really be involved once again. Number 13, another interesting floor play in this tier. The last guy I think I would really like to trust in a jam, Zack Ertz versus Dallas. He scored a touchdown last week, but the matchup was much better, and I'm not expecting that to happen. But maybe it will. The Cowboys actually have given up 3 touchdowns the last 5 games, but not that many yards. But Ertz is one of the only targets for Daniels, and I do think Daniels will play well, so Ertz is a safe streaming option. Similar to last week, you're hoping for a touchdown, but in general, he offers kind of the same production as Dissly, roughly 40 yards on 4 catches per week. Number 14, I think, is a big teardrop, though. I think at this point we're just chasing touchdowns, and it's only upside in terms of appeal. But Tucker Kraft versus the Niners could get back in the end zone. Last week he put up a bagel, though, and maybe you dropped him because you don't want to deal with the headache. But the Niners are a bottom 5 matchup. They've not given up a single touchdown to the position, so might happen again. Without it, Kraft usually burns you. He doesn't get a lot of volume. Nobody really does in this passing game in Green Bay. So that's a liability, but you know sometimes he blows up. If you're just trying to get the highest ceiling, then go with Kraft. But obviously you have to accept the room for 0 points. It could be less than 3 from Kraft. Wouldn't shock you at all. Number 15 is TJ Hockenson for me at Chicago, and I actually ranked Josh Oliver, his teammate, right behind him. Oliver has been way better, averaging 9.1 points the last 4 games, 44 yards and 2 touchdowns in this offense. But there are more targets going to Hockenson. He's averaging 5.9 points per game in his last 3 with 5.3 targets, 4.3 catches, 37 yards per game, no touchdowns. However, they have used Oliver as Hockenson is a bit more of a decoy in the red zone. So Oliver has the upside. I don't think Oliver is going away, and that's why Hockenson is not the safest bet, but his contract is massive, and 2 weeks ago he had 9 targets. Last week was strange. I think it will pivot back to him pretty soon. So I'm still going to rank Hockenson as the better play, but if Oliver has more points, I wouldn't be shocked at all. The matchup does rank top 11. The Bears give up 72 yards per game to the position. So interesting options, but at this late in the ranks, I'd rather pass. I'd still only roster Hockenson. I think I'd leave Oliver on the wire. At 17, it's very tough to trust Cole Kmet. He's been terrible since the bye, no touchdowns and only 17 yards per game. The tight end 34 in that stretch. So odds are you've dropped him, but obviously he has high upside. Similar to Tucker Kraft, if he scored 2 touchdowns this week, you wouldn't be shocked. But I really think they need to get him back involved. That's why I think their offenses sucked so badly. He is not getting enough targets at all. So if the new offensive coordinator does change things, last week he had 3 targets and he caught all 3 of them. That wasn't enough for me to feel good about it. But at some point, Kmet can go off. This week, it is a terrible matchup. The Vikings have not given up a single touchdown to the position the last 5 games. So could be rough. Cole Kmet, not the best bet, but if someone goes for over 20, I think it would be him at this point in the ranks. 18, I have JaTavion Sanders, and I think it's a different tier as well. Now you're just going back to the floor, but it's pretty capped upside in general. JaTavion does average 7.2 points per game the last 4 weeks. That does include a touchdown, though, against the Giants 2 weeks ago. 41 yards per game, though, is something, and if that's all you're hoping for, if you have your starter on buying, you're desperate, then go with Sanders. He's not the worst bet. The Chiefs do allow 67 yards per game the last 5 weeks, but interestingly, Luke Schoonmaker might be way too low in these rankings. Last week, he had 10 targets with Jake Ferguson going out with a concussion. And given he's the backup, I'm sure on the practice squad, there's a lot better chemistry with Schoonmaker and Cooper Rush than some of the starters. So I could see these 10 targets repeat. I really see a role will be there for Schoonmaker. So I might be way too low. The Commanders also allow 3 touchdowns to the position the last 5 games, and Schoonmaker had 56 yards on 6 catches last week. Maybe he's a good pivot if your waiver wire is depleted and you just lost Ferguson the last few weeks without him. You might look to Schoonmaker. He's not the worst bet. I could rank him, honestly, right behind Zack Ertz in the same realm as Tucker Kraft. If you're desperate enough, why not? So at 19, I could consider it, but odds are I'll pass. when Ferguson comes back, I think you can't start him. So why pick him up for just 1 week unless you're desperate? At 20, I got Noah Fant versus Arizona. And that's probably the last guy I'd really consider. He is practicing, but he's missed the last 2 games with injury. Maybe he doesn't play for the 3rd week in a row, but he does average 44 yards per game. That is something similar to Sanders, JaTavion Sanders, the rookie. 21 through 25, I'm definitely benching, but I will mention them. Dalton Schultz, Pat Freiermuth, Theo Johnson, Isaiah Likely, and Noah Gray. Obviously, with Likely and Gray, it's kind of just vulture potential, but Schultz did have a decent yardage last week. He did step up a little bit more with Nico Collins back on the field. Freiermuth had a decent game. The matchup was top 8, and the matchup for Theo Johnson is top 2, so maybe he plays well also, but I really doubt it. With Tommy DeVito, you can't really predict much in that offense. But now let's finish it up with defensive rankings, the top 26 defenses. There are 6 teams on bye. Number 1 is clearly the Broncos, in my opinion. The Raiders have a terrible offense, and they caught 3 interceptions on Minshew back in week 5. They only have 8 interceptions on the year, and we consider them a great defense. So Broncos, definitely number 1. They should dominate the Raiders. Number 2, I have the Commanders versus Dallas, and the Dan Quinn revenge game with extra rest should be great. The Dallas offense might not win another game all year long. The number 3 defense for me would be the Texans versus the Titans, and Texans rank 4th in the NFL in total takeaways with 20. They have 14 interceptions, 6 fumbles, and now they get Will Levis. They could catch another 5 interceptions like they did on Goff. Number 4 is the Chiefs at Carolina, and any trap game chances are probably nullified following the loss to Buffalo. Unless Jonathan Brooks adds a dimension we've never seen before, this should be an easy top 5 play against Bryce Young. Number 5 and 6 is where I rank the Steelers and Browns entering Thursday night. With the snow, I thought both of them were very safe plays, and the Browns only put up 6 points in my league scoring, so maybe they won't live up to top 10 production, but you're not going to get completely burned with 6 points. The Steelers put up 10 points, and just as I expected, they were the better play. They had more turnovers, but they did lose the game like I thought. At 7 and 8, I have the Seahawks and Cardinals in the same game, and rain is expected in this matchup. It should be raining all throughout the game, and that will benefit the defenses a bit. So I see a very gritty defensive grind in this NFC West battle. These division games are critical. So maybe Arizona's offense is better than I give it credit for. I have underestimated them for a month now, and perhaps I am wrong, but I do think the Seahawks win. That is the tiebreaker for me. But both defenses, I think, will play very well. Cardinals defense, very well coached as of late. Their talent, though, is not the same as the Seattle Seahawks have on the roster. So I'm going to trust Seattle a bit more, but both offenses probably struggle to go over 20 points. I think the floor is very high with both Seattle and Arizona in the rain. At 9, I got the Vikings at Chicago, and in division, it should be another low-scoring game. Vikings ranked top 3 in takeaways this season with 21 total, and they have 1 less game than the top 2. So technically, they rank first in that department. Caleb is a rookie, but he doesn't turn it over at all, actually. Caleb rarely throws picks. So that's the problem. Maybe the turnovers don't happen here for Minnesota, but Caleb also doesn't throw touchdown passes. So I wouldn't be concerned. The floor is very high for the Vikings this week. At number 10, I have the Packers versus the Niners, and this is a weird game to predict, but with the backup quarterback, you definitely feel more confident in the Packers defense. They rank 6th in takeaways this season. San Francisco ranks 9th, and I think both teams have multiple turnovers, but Brandon Allen probably caps the offensive output in San Francisco. So I do think the Packers probably win, and against the backup, it's definitely an upgrade, but it's still Kyle Shanahan. I don't feel great about it. I could still see 30 points from the Niners offense in a must-win situation. So at 10, I think I'd probably start him, but I don't feel insanely good about it. There is some risk with Green Bay. At 11, I got the Lions at the Colts, and against Richardson, they probably force some turnovers. The Lions also ranked top 5 in takeaways this year with 19, 14 picks, 5 fumbles. Richardson is technically a rookie quarterback, not literally, but in terms of experience, that is technically the case, and I don't think it's anywhere near as good of a matchup as the Jets were last week. The interception upside offers a massive ceiling for Detroit. Pick 6 could happen. At number 12, I got the Bears versus Minnesota, and it should be a tough NFC North matchup. I am worried about Darnold. This should be a close, low-scoring game. The Bears defense always plays much better at home, though, and the Vikings only scored 12 against the Jags, 23 against Tennessee. I think Chicago holds them to less than 20. Just like the Packers game, they will keep it close. So sneaky upset potential for Chicago. I think against Darnold, there is some pick six potential as well. At 13, I think the last floor play would be the Dolphins versus the Patriots. It's a rookie quarterback, and Miami shut down the Rams a couple weeks ago. Their defense has looked good as of late. So at home, I definitely trust them. They should win, and New England probably won't score more than 3 touchdowns. At 14, I think is where I'd rather pass, though. The Niners at Green Bay are desperate enough to play well, but against the Packers, I'd rather avoid it. It's a good offense most of the time. So while they have forced 7 interceptions the last 5 games, 11 on the year, and Love does throw turnovers, I'd rather avoid it. I don't think the Niners are the best start you could find, but maybe I'm ranking them too low. I could rank the Eagles too low as well at 15. They are way more talented than this. The last 6 weeks since the bye have been insane. They're way more productive than this ranking would suggest, so I might be way too low on the Eagles. But the Rams offense is a scary matchup. At some point, the McVay offense will get going. So it's much more likely a 33 to 35 score this week than like a 30 to 14 blowout. And I think the Eagles offense just scores too much. The Rams have to counter at some point. So at 15, I'd rather bench them, but I'm not dropping them. They're one of the difference makers rest of season. I think they're a top 5 defense at the moment. Number 16, I got the Titans at Houston, and in division, it might not be the worst damage, but I'm definitely going to pass. Nico Collins should probably go off inevitably. And then the Bucks at the Giants. Against DeVito, you'd expect it's a good spot, but the Bucks rank bottom 3 in yards allowed, bottom 6 in points allowed, and they've been a terrible defense this season. I don't trust them at all. And DeVito did not turn it over very much last season, so I'd rather pass on Tampa. They win the game, but I actually think the Giants offense plays well. At 18, I got the Patriots at Miami, and Tua at home should play well. He usually plays very well in this divisional spot in Miami. So no thank you. The only reason they're ranked this high at this point is because 6 teams are on bye. So definitely bench the Raiders. The Broncos offense is rolling right now. Definitely don't trust them. The Giants versus Tampa off a bye against Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans. No thanks at all. 21, I got the Panthers versus Mahomes off a loss. No fucking chance. And then the Chargers and Ravens game is probably a massive shootout. So although the Chargers are very tempting, I'll avoid it. I could be wrong here, but I will bench both the Chargers and the Ravens. Ravens defense is really bad in the secondary. I think both teams score over 30 this week. At 24, I got the Rams versus the Eagles. Eagles offense is way too scary. 25, I got the Cowboys at Washington. I feel like they've given up on defense. And at 26, I got the Colts versus Detroit. No way you can start a defense against the Lions. So that's it for this video. My top 20 rankings here on the screen at all 3 positions. And I feel very safe about the top 8 quarterbacks. I think all the way through Kyler Murray, you have a very safe 19-point floor. But Mahomes probably goes over 18. I think at that point, you're kind of streaming the position. And from Mahomes all the way to Drake May, Geno Smith, I think you should expect roughly 16 to 18 points. I think the floor is safe. Those are the starters, in my opinion. Mostly streamers, more of a cap ceiling this week because of those matchups that are elite that are missing on bye. I mentioned at the top of the video. So quarterback's a bit rough. If you have Herbert or Nix, if you pick them up off the wire the last few weeks, this is the week where I think they could be a massive difference. If they didn't win you your week last week, it should happen in week 12. So definitely start them. I think the top 16 are the guys this week. At tight end, I think it gets pretty rough outside the top 7. Once we hit Jonnu Smith, you are streaming the position. So start the top 7 no matter what. Feel pretty good about all their production. However, pretty touchdown dependent, starting with Jonnu at number 8. I think Zack Ertz is the last safe cutoff point in terms of floor. I think those are the only startable tight ends. Once we hit Kraft, you are just praying and hoping for the best, but probably get burned more likely than not. At defense, I think the top 13 are the cutoff point as well. I don't feel too good about the Niners or every defense after that point. With 6 teams on bye, 13 teams does represent half the league this week. So good luck to you. If you still have any questions, let me know in the comment section. But I got to end this video. The lighting is terrible. And this is what I do. I record into the night. It's 5:16 p.m. as I'm recording, but apologies for the late post. I have been kind of late with some posts lately, so gonna try and fix that. But here it is, Week 12 rankings. I'll be updating them tomorrow on Saturday with all the injury report news, as always. So subscribe if you don't want to miss out. Ring the notification bell as well. And I'll see you in the next video. My name is Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.